All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you again for coming to the Noise Compatibility Program Technical Advisory Committee. We have most of the committee, well, some of the committee members at the table here. For those that don't know me, I think everybody does, but my name is Nick Longo. I'm the Deputy Director of Aviation here at the airport. This is one of the programs that we're moving forward with and almost done in some ways or another. Maybe some would say we're just getting started. I just wanted to update everybody on a few really good things. We have some exciting news with new air service, so we just wanted to share it with this committee. Delta Airlines is going to be offering nonstop service to JFK. This is great, friendly competition with JetBlue already going to JFK, but hopefully that will help with some of our airline prices throughout the season. American Airlines is also going to be competing on the Chicago O'Hare route, flying direct to Chicago twice a day. Again, an increased seat capacity, more availability of options for travelers. Competition always good for ticket prices. So we're very excited about it and wanted to share it at the meeting.
When are those services likely to start?
JFK with Delta is going to be March 4th, I believe, and then the American is June 9th. Yep. Second on my list is the noise exposure map. We are still pushing forward. In fact, we as a group just were on the phone with FAA headquarters to fund this as soon as possible, to include F-35 data and incorporate future statistics and future data into the map. We're still awaiting for the funding and the authorization to move forward. I know it, we've worked diligently to push this ahead of the line and worked with FAA to get this as quickly as possible, and they've been a great partner of ours, and we'll continue to update you all, this committee and the community, as soon as that funding comes through. We're hopeful that it does come through very soon. We were also hopeful that Richard Doucette was going to be here today, and he was planning on coming, but there was a small thing that happened on Friday. So his plans were canceled.
Absolutely. So are we off cycle with the funding request for the noise exposure map now, or are we trying to get into a funding cycle? I guess really I'm asking about predictability of what's going to happen next.
There's two kind of options on the table. The quickest option that we're pushing forward with is to receive funding in an already funded grant. So that way they can amend this open grant, and then we can move forward with it right away. An alternative option is to put it into a grant application. That would be due by May 1st, and then it would be funded by the end of the federal fiscal year by September.
Are you optimistic on either one?
We kind of heard some different opinions at the FAA headquarter level versus the New England level, but we're very positive about funding it in an open grant, which means quicker. But we have that backup. Yeah. Yep.
So if we're positive in the open grant, then Nick, what are we looking at for a timetable?
If it's in the open grant, we already have the scope of work. We have the contract all set up and ready to roll. We have some with Jones Payne Group, and HMMH are going to be subcontracting with them. Timeline 12 months, I think we had in the schedule, maybe 18 months. No. Sorry, for the project. Yeah, it depends on federal funding. So if we get the okay to open it or to complete it in the new grant, almost immediately. We'll have some internal approval processes to go forward with, but I would say within 30 days we're going to be having kickoffs on getting it going once we receive the authorization. If we have to apply for the new grant, it's going to be a much longer wait period.
So if we're fortunate,
if we're fortunate,
we could be looking at a new NEM no later than February of 19.
Correct. And the way we work is we always push diligently to get it accomplished as quickly as possible. to much of the dismay of consultants, I'm hoping to get that base year in 2018, which means a submittal by December 31st.
Who's the project manager?
Well, it would be the
Right. And I think
yeah,
part
but
of
we
that,
we
yeah.
shoot for the stars,
Right.
and then we will adjust as necessary.
So
What
the
Nick's saying
35
to you is we agree to do what we're doing, and we're putting all of our effort into it, including additional calls, with the FAA and going to the highest level that we're able to go. So I just want you to know we've put our effort, we kept our word, and we're optimistic at this point. But it is the government, so it absolutely means nothing.
Yeah, so the key dates though, possibly February next year.
Yep.
And if we get into a standard funding cycle for September, then we're looking at September of next year.
Yep.
And the F-35s are due in when? September next year. Okay. So just wanted to make sure those key dates are February, earliest possible NEM, September, latest possible, hopefully latest possible NEM.
Yeah. Yep.
F-35 arrival for the first aircraft for a ship.
Is 19, and then the what the schedule we've been given is the remaining F-35s in 2020. So we would still be on schedule to have a noise exposure map completed well before the majority of the F-35s are.
Sir, I can't speak.
Anybody? No?
My understanding, you don't have to talk, but my understanding was we're gonna get one in October, and then the rest will follow sometime within 6 months.
Yeah.
But that's unofficial, that's just what I've heard.
Hence the reason why we're so adamant about funding it in an open grant and getting it full speed ahead as quickly as possible.
I think what we're saying is the airport's done everything it's able to do, and so we're, we certainly understand people's concerns, and we're trying to, address those by being aggressive. And Nick has done an amazing job, I think, to this point of getting as much information as he can get and working with as many folks as he can get to get the best positive results.
I'm not challenging that.
Oh, no, I just
I
let you
most
know.
certainly appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure we understood what the key dates were.
Sure. Before I hand it over to Sarah, she's going to go over the agenda and jump right into the presentations. I just want to make sure everybody knows each other. We can go around the room real quick. Marianne?
Marianne Broom doing minutes.
Steve Wislowski, South Burlington School District Board.
Erin Destel, Vermont Small Business Accelerators.
Dave Link, Media Production.
Jen Norris, Efficiency Vermont.
Jeremy King, for Vermont Gas and Energy Conservation and on South Burlington Energy.
Steve Marriott, Chamberlain.
Seth Batten, GBIC. Charlie Baker, Virginia County Regional Planning Commission.
Paul?
Paul Connor, City of South Burlington.
Carmen Sargent, 45-year resident of 21 Elizabeth Street.
George Milling, 40-year resident, 38 Logwood Street, member of the technical advisor.
Jesse Baker, City of Winooski.
Bob McEwing, Town of Essex.
Major Callan, Vermont Guard.
Colonel John Johnston, Vermont Army National Guard.
Larry Lackey, Director of Engineering here at the airport.
Larry's has taken over the position of Director of Engineering and Environmental Compliance. Amanda's counterpart, for those that remember Amanda.
And a great asset. We feel very fortunate. We feel sad that we lost Amanda because she was exceptional. But the private sector took her, unfortunately for us. But fortunately for us, Larry decided to leave the state and come to BTV. And so we have somebody that's hitting the road running with experience and tremendous engineering and environmental and airport experience. Brad Nicholas, HMA.
Sarah DeGudis, the Jones Payne Group.
Diane Carter, the Jones Payne Group.
Shelby Loder, Director of Ground Transportation here at the airport.
Gene Richards, Director of Aviation.
So again, thank you, committee members and public, Efficiency Vermont, Vermont Gas. Thank you very much for attending, and let's get into the meat of the presentation.
So we will open it up to a brief public forum and comment period, but just first to go over the agenda. So we're really going to get into starting to go through the recommendations with this meeting. We'll be doing an overview of the airport operations and the monitoring review elements. So this is just following up on a couple items that were sort of loose ends from last time talking about existing. Then we're going to start in the meat of this. So the focus of the noise compatibility program is really to focus on the land use. So moving away from land acquisition, bringing in sound insulation and other programs. We're going to spend most of tonight really focusing on that sound insulation program and primarily the residential portion of that. A lot of it applies to the community buildings, but the bulk of that is residential. In terms of the presentation, if we can hold comments to the end of each section, so end of the operations section, end of the monitoring and review and sound insulation, just so we can kind of move things forward, and then we'll have a comment period at the end for anything that sort of ties in all of those portions. So with that, I'm going to open it up to a public forum and comment period if anyone has anything. Yep.
Yeah, at the end of the last meeting in December, we were talking about navigation easements, and there was a lot of information there, and it didn't seem like we came to real clear resolutions. Is that going to be talked about at all today?
So we will briefly be mentioning where navigation easements will be used in sound insulation. One of the items that we want to sort of thread through all of these land use measures with sales assistance, purchase assurance, sound insulation programs is where navigation easements may be required, and have the committee and the community start thinking about what they would want to see in a navigation easement. We won't be resolving that tonight. We'll sort of bring that through, and it'll be a thread through these and something for the committee to be thinking about, and then we'll be tying that in at the end with sort of what that looks like and working with the airport and the city to understand what's in that.
If there is any comments that you do have from the last meeting, specifically on language or whatever the scenario would be from either municipalities or as a resident, feel free to shoot them our way so we can start incorporating that right into the dialogue.
All right. Anything else? All right. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad Nichols.
So there were just a couple of loose ends on the airport operations measures. Again, the focus of this NCP is on the land use measures. There are also program management, which I will deal with briefly as well. On the airport operations measures, just going back to some of the ones that were implemented. Does that stand? Thank you. I think the status that we had said on the extension of Taxiway Gulf was it's partially implemented or will be implemented. Just to make clear, the noise abatement benefit of that is specifically on that peach-colored portion where the aircraft don't need to taxi down as close to Airport Drive. There's pavement there now, and just want to make it clear that functionally this is implemented at this point. So even though there's still pavement work to be done around that and the realignment of that blue section to come in the future, as far as the noise abatement benefit, aircraft can taxi on that portion now, and so that benefit's there. Just wanted to make that clear. Yes.
Brad, quick question on this map. This is the map that was from the prior noise compatibility plan, or the current noise compatibility plan, correct?
I am not sure the province of that graphic.
I don't remember it being actually in the NCP.
The idea of moving the taxiways further from the neighborhood was considered noise abatement.
Correct. Yes.
I don't want to get into a lot of detail on it, but the holding bays, maybe the wrong term, the holding bays at the north end off the blue area, how does that relate to this?
Right now, we've worked with your DRB on analyzing what and what not to put into the to that, if ever they would be put back onto the drawing board and into the DRB process, sketch, whatever the case may be, then we would talk about this, and certainly we would talk about it in a noise exposure map update as well for ground noise.
Because my understanding was this is an update on the existing measures.
Mhm.
It wasn't clear to me whether the holding bays are considered an existing measure or a new proposal that would be considered in Chapter 5, which is new things.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure where to make sure that that's captured if it needs to be captured.
It's going to be a chicken or the egg type of thing for us too, because we don't know if we're going to move forward with the holding bays at this point in this construction, nor do we know if we are going to have the funding for it. You're right, we should probably plan for it, at least in a planning process like the NCP. So maybe that's something we can add into the extension of taxiway golf. Maybe not as yes, we are moving forward with it, but something to think about in it, and maybe some measures to incorporate them in a noise exposure map. Yada yada. That's a good question. And obviously, we'd continue to go through local land use jurisdiction permitting. Okay.
On the terminal power installation, one item, again, it was marked as partially implemented. I think primarily, well, let me go back. In the last presentation, I said that it was at 9, I believe, of 11 gate positions. What I want to make clear, and we've in discussions realized that it's at all the actual jet bridge positions. All the positions where you could have that equipment installed on the jet bridge, it's installed. So there aren't any positions where it's not installed. And they are, both the airport and the operators want to use them whenever it's feasible. There's not anybody trying to avoid the use of them. So it's really is, again, functionally completely implemented in terms of the equipment is there at all jet bridge locations, and the airlines want to use that instead of APU and GPU whenever possible.
I'm just going to touch real quick on this, just to reiterate what this is auxiliary power unit, ground power unit. So this is, think of it as a small generator outside the aircraft, powering the electrical units on the aircraft itself, whether that generator's inside the aircraft or literally on the ground power unit. So it reduces, this is actually installed inside of these jet bridges, reducing the ground noise at the airport.
On that subject, is the airport or HMMH aware of the potential opportunity that exists with the VW settlement in this area? So the states are getting settlement money from the old Volkswagen thing, and
oh yes,
one of the potentially eligible funding uses for the funding that's coming to Vermont appears to be something in this realm. I'm not technical enough to know that, but in reading through the list, there appear to be some opportunities for things like that.
Yeah, we are working with our city and trying to incorporate the airport into that whole package as well. I don't know how that's going to come out in the end, but hopeful.
Gotcha.
No.
So with the addition of the United and the Delta aircraft,
Yes.
right? Does that mean we have an adder in the morning activity at the southern concourses? Probably, right?
Is that the next slide? No. We're still going to try to minimize the use of those southern concourses or southern jet bridges. They're what we're labeling them as auxiliary jet bridges, at least on that southwest jet bridge closest to the fence line. Potentially, yes, it could add they are morning flights, and they could add
a couple of weeks ago, there was a few aircraft out there that had some rather challenging starts.
Yeah, that was an anomaly because the jet bridge broke down. $1 million jet bridge with a couple $1,000 piece of equipment that broke the unit down.
Painfully became aware of that. Nice alarm clock.
So speaking of the jet bridges and the southern ones,
oh yeah,
just wanted to again update. This is not a formal NCP measure, but something the airport is doing to limit the ground noise. They're minimizing the use of those jet bridges, and in addition, I think we actually did mention this last time. I'm not sure if there was a slide though for it. That they are not starting up at that position, but being pushed back further onto the taxiway before the actual startup, which would further reduce noise. So these again are things that the airport is doing in addition to the existing ground noise NCP measure. One other measure that is not implemented that we discussed last time was the bidirectional runway use, and we mentioned that is something that's for nighttime. And it's something that you need the tower to implement, and the tower not being open, it's not possible to do that. I just wanted to say that if the tower were to open at night at a future time, this is something that the airport could then pursue with them. Your noise sound committee could talk with the airport about, say, hey, the tower's open now, you should go talk to them about that. And there has been talk now of that could possibly happen, the tower being open at night. So just throwing that out there, that could be something that's in your NCP, and it would be the airport and the ongoing sound mitigation committee who would keep an eye on things, and when the opportunity arises, start working on implementing that measure that is already in your NCP.
Would that apply to commercial and military, or just commercial? If that was to be implemented, because I know at times, right, the 16s fly at night.
Well, like any runway use, it's not a simple thing that the tower says you will do this or you won't do this. It's a thing. They have a preferential direction, and they talk with people. If they want to land the other direction and it's safe to do so, they would still be able to do that.
And we'd be able to more formally add noise abatement procedures during those currently off hours of the air traffic control tower. When the tower is 24/7, those can be monitored and used and displayed more to the pilots, and working with VTAC on how to accomplish that. Yeah. But we need that tower open 24/7 to accomplish that, and we're going to work tirelessly again with the FAA, different division, to get the tower open 24/7.
Okay, so that's it on the operations measures, kind of loose ends on that. On to the monitoring and review elements. The first slide here says no new measures are planned. We did take a look at this, and I'm going to go through why that's the case. And I see you looking quizzical, so hold that look until I'm through this. So first, the measures that we talked about last time. So in between the last meeting and this one, we went and looked and did a comprehensive look at every measure that the FAA has approved in an NCP from 2000 until today, program management measures. And they roughly fell into 8 or 9 categories. So these are the things that realistically could be implemented. All of those measures were either already implemented formally in your NCP, implemented by the airport already but not in the NCP, or did not seem applicable to the airport. I'm going to go through each of those types of things. We'll start with your existing NCP and the items here. So you have ongoing monitoring and review of your NEM and NCP. Again, that's something you're doing right now, and it also happens through your sound committee. You can keep track of the status of any implementation of measures. It's going to keep going. So that is something that's implemented, the review of that. Another type of measure that has been approved is ongoing noise advisory committees. You have the Sound Mitigation Committee, which I understand meets quarterly, and that is planned to continue on. So that's another thing that is implemented, and it's in your NCP. I'm going to get to permanent noise monitoring system is another thing, and flight track monitoring. I'm going to go to the next measure, which talks about flight track monitoring. Again, usually that's a single system, monitoring of flight tracks, monitoring of noise levels. I said last time, and we'll say again, the most important part of that is what operations are happening, what times are they happening at, and where are those flight paths. The airport is moving forward to pursue that, and here are a few more details. It's going to allow you to access the flight track data online. and you're going to have the ability to go back and review things that happened in the past. And it's going to then provide forward in terms of overall monitoring and review. You're going to have a database of these operations that can be used in various analyses for looking at flight paths over time or trends in operations. So there's a little more information on the flight track monitoring system. Again, and the date you're thinking in terms of having real movement on that is?
We're working through some contracts right now, but hopefully there's some physical equipment that we have to set up out there. So hopefully by the end of the summer, we're going to have this in place with the equipment, which is video cameras out on the airfield, with the online system available to the public. Worst case scenario by the end of the summer.
What about strategically located sound monitoring?
Sound recording devices or whatnot, kind of like this.
Well, yeah, a little more sophisticated, probably.
Yeah, we don't have that in the current plan to implement those. We're not sure, and you'll probably know this, if the FAA would fund those.
They will fund the initial installation of equipment, but they will not fund the ongoing maintenance and support, which is significant. There's still maintenance, actually maintenance and support that goes on even if installing the flight track monitoring with the software updates and that, but there is ongoing calibration and software support that goes along with the noise monitoring, and usually the company will keep an online database of all those, and the FAA will not pay any of the ongoing maintenance and support of that. And it's our recommendation that is not the best use of resources.
So having remote wireless, basically noise meters in strategic areas where the few that are allowed to be used remotely are not advantageous or not the best use of resources.
It's not the best use of resources. There are airports that choose to do that. Usually larger airports and having have these systems. I don't think it's the best use of resources. In the end, people want to know where the flight paths are and what planes are flying, and they know it's loud at their house. You know it's loud at your house. You don't need a number to tell you that. So in the end, that noise monitoring, and one thing to point out is it's not going to be used to establish a noise exposure map or make decisions about sound insulation. It's not going to be used to say this plane or that plane can't fly. So those numbers, they can serve a reporting and tracking purpose, but they are much less useful than other things that the airport's currently pursuing, like the flight tracking. Okay. Let me get through a few more of these measures. So now we've gotten through the measures.
Sorry, just one more quick question on the reporting online. I've seen with some other airports, such as the Cleveland Airport, that their noise committee, whatever it is, when they meet quarterly, reviews the data that's come in, reviews anomalies, reviews the comments that have been made to see if there's anything that's out of the ordinary, and do an evaluation of what happened. Was it negative 48 that
right.
for a couple days and something happened, or some way to, this seems like a potential opportunity here to close a feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
That we know there's been some fits and starts over the last
Yep.
few years about being able to say, here's where you report, here's how you can tag it to something that has happened, and here's the group that's going to look and see what happened and determine if there's some kind of correctional action that could have been taken for next time.
Yeah, you're exactly right. One of the two major reasons why we really like this system is exactly what you're talking about. We can collect the data, we can report to the Sound Mitigation Committee meeting or Airport Commission or whoever the reporting would go to, and it's available online. And then we can analyze that with those particular groups to look at anomalies, to look at changes that we might want to make, to incorporate this into noise abatement procedures with air traffic control, all those types of things. And the second one is to get a more personal interaction with somebody that did file a complaint. So right now, we have to do quite a bit of research going, what time was it? We have to work with air traffic control to get their data, to go through the process of what do we think it is, whereas this system automates most of that. So we can have a one-on-one interaction with a particular homeowner or municipality or whatever the case might be.
Which is really good, but I also want to make sure that we're not just having the one-on-one. The one-on-one is very important. However, we should also be able to step back and look at anomalous data, anomalous feedback, so that we can look systematically.
I think it's something the committee should look at and say, what are the important things we want to track? And just ask the question, request to the airport, say, we want to know operations in these categories of aircraft by month, by quarter, by whatever. Let's talk about times when there's going to be runway closures, whatever. You have the data available to do that. And one of the things you have, again, to point out is, should something change in terms of a published procedure, you're going to have the data that shows exactly what that changed. There are many airports now going through a process of talking to the FAA about, this procedure changed. You said it was going to actually be just an overlay of what's existing. It doesn't feel like an overlay to us. Yeah. You have the data then to go back and look at
and it's 24 hours, so we get that full picture.
Does this incorporate all flights?
Yes.
So the commercial flights, the private aviation, and the
military
flights?
Yes.
That's depending on your data source. Sometimes the military flights
incorporate it with the flight radar data.
In some way in this feedback, because if it doesn't, for example, include anything to do with the loudest planes, then that will be challenging for the public to provide feedback on some aspects of that.
Yeah.
If there were something happening unusual.
There's other airports that actually have F-16 operations that we try to track. It all depends on what the equipment is inside the military aircraft, whether they're grouped together and how they're
again, I don't know I don't know exactly what the signal path, I guess you'd say, of the radar data getting to these guys will be, but certain FAA systems, what are deemed sensitive flights, are scrubbed before they're passed on to, but that doesn't mean all military though. Sometimes military are, but there are things that are deemed sensitive that are scrubbed out of data.
I mean, well, all aircraft entering into an ARSA, right, they have to be, aren't they blind encoded and tagged so that the tower or somebody knows
they're
coming in and when?
Yeah.
Because it's picked up in the data doesn't mean it's necessarily kept in the stream that is then passed on to various commercial sources.
So some of it is redacted.
It can be.
So we understand that there's sensitive data, and that's not the intent to open up sensitive data. At the same time, as you're doing your looking at the options about how to proceed, being able to capture the salient elements of it that relate back to the purpose of why we're collecting this.
Yep.
The intent of the contract and the scope of the work is try to incorporate all flights that use this airport, knowing that there's redacted or whatever the case may be. The intent is to do that and to share that.
Commercial, VTANG, and also...
Correct.
Now, what about other ground operations which could contribute to...
Ground operations are a little bit different. There's got to be a certain piece of equipment. Yeah, there's got to be a certain piece of equipment installed on the aircraft and recorded in the data, ADSB. So I'm unsure of that and what the capabilities of each individual aircraft would be. Again, the intent is, and the hope is to incorporate as much as possible.
I'd be curious if we could do that.
Yeah.
I know with sound meters, that anomaly would be picked up, tower wouldn't be around, didn't need to be around, but nevertheless there would be a recorded incident, if you will, of a run-up. And what's interesting is you have an aircraft out there that's running up for 30 minutes and 40 minutes. How do you account for that in terms of an aircraft noises? you know, from calculating the level day-night counted as one? I don't think so. But then again, you know, the frequency of that occurring and the duration of it, that's a pretty significant event.
Yeah, that's
Especially in the
interesting.
summer when people's windows are open.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, so you've got something out there roaring out by wherever where FedEx is, or the FBO there, and it's continuous for 30, 40 minutes. How do you account for that?
I'm not sure if it would pertain to this, but certainly in the noise exposure map, we'd be able to analyze
Well,
it.
I've had that discussion with Dave, right? But with regards to recording that type of information, I would think it would be a good thing to do, because then it would make for a more accurate NEM the next time
Yeah,
around.
or at least the collection of it. I see what you're saying.
Well, I would say that there's a value to it in just understanding if there's an operational thing, an anomaly that happened with what.
Sure.
You know, if part of the point of this is to track so that we can help have a better understanding of the feedback that's being provided,
Yep.
what's happening, capturing something like that, if that's a potential.
Yeah. That's a good.
reason why a neighbor
We're gonna get
would
to
have
this in a
something
second,
right,
so
they can tag it
I
to
didn't
what
think
was that
we would,
event.
but
That would be fantastic.
let's get to it. Let me get through it because we're actually going to revisit this in a second. So again, these are the elements, the last two slides that are implemented in the plan. Other things the airport are doing that match up with, again, in the 8 or 9 categories include public awareness. They do post information on their website, so they're already doing that. Another one would be complaint management, and that is they're currently taking through the general email and a noise phone number, and the Air Guard also receives phone calls. And they are receiving those, responding to those, tracking them, and reporting on the numbers of those that occur to the Sound Mitigation Committee.
Not that last piece that
Not-
I'm aware of.
Well, we're reporting only the ones that the airport has responded to. So the commercial, I think Carmine, you mentioned this in some past presentations, that we'll continue to work with VTAC on additional reports.
We've never gotten any more information than what you presented at that meeting a couple of meetings ago.
Sure.
And the point just was that it was pretty, not any information at all if you didn't include it with the military.
Yep,
claims.
and we will. Our goal is to report that to you on the Sound Mitigation Committee. Not really the intent of the Technical Advisory Committee, so that we can get through the NCP measures. But that's something that we can incorporate, and this flight track monitoring system would help us do this as well in a much greater detail. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
I think that'll help out quite a bit. We went to this noise conference, we met with all the vendors, and we do hear what you all say, and we do want to have a device, a way to make everybody's life a little easier as far as, and more accurate. So this device that we're looking into, we believe would solve that, and it'll make it, it's very automated and very accurate, so we think it can be dead on.
Well, it puts you in a position of being more proactive.
Yeah.
And better communications with the community, and also with, city government.
Yep.
We think it's a tool that, the airports has grown into, and it's a tool that would be helpful, not only for that element, but also for managing our revenue and what comes in and goes out of the airport. It has multiple uses, but the key one is the one that will be able to communicate with you 100% accurately, instead of saying we just don't know what that was because we weren't here, or we called the tower and they didn't know. So this way we'll be able to get dead on what the issues are.
Okay. Next measure is dedicated noise staff. This is funding a standalone position. Currently, again, in terms of taking complaints, presenting information at committees, working, it's done by staff who that is not their only job, and the airport does not feel that there is a full-time position to be found there, simply on doing noise-related things. So the Work is being handled, but it's not by a dedicated position. And it's, in my experience, is appropriate for an airport of this size to be doing that. Sometimes it's handled in environment or planning or ops. It kind of goes all over the place sometimes, but the job is being handled by various staff. Airfield signage and handouts, that is another measure. Usually when there are formalized noise abatement flight paths and procedures, right now there are not any implemented. Should that be the case at a future date, that there are these formalized procedures, then that would be appropriate. And the last one is video monitoring. And I didn't think this was going to come up, but in terms of the way you just did, but it's usually a measure to monitor ground activity, usually at somewhere where there is something like a run-up enclosure or something like that, where you would have records then of every aircraft that used that. I'm not sure that it's really, I don't know of any systems that are monitoring like a whole airfield and finding things. So I'm not sure that systems exist that do that. But in our review of this, we didn't think it was appropriate because, again, what we're familiar with is where there's ground run-up enclosure, there's a camera there, and then they can go back the next morning after the run-ups in the night, they look through and then they log the tail numbers of the plane that went in there to use the run-up enclosure. That's my experience with the video monitoring. So I don't know of anything that's like what you're describing. So that was a measure, again, we didn't.
Are there typical areas where these kinds of things take place on the airport?
Great question.
Where there would need to be like a roving Roomba that goes.
So there's two things that we can do. We can set the appropriate space to do engine run-ups and maintenance checks for the engine. So we can designate one particular spot on an airport or multiple spots, whatever the case may be. To incorporate what you're talking about, this may have the capability of doing it because it's while not video, it's still photography of these sites, but at least it would be able to, for us to collect the data to analyze, is this the best spot to put this in?
And another related question, I mean, you do have control, somewhat control over the operations of your tenants.
Absolutely.
Being FBOs in terms of the direction that the engine nacelles are pointed when they do those things.
Correct. Correct. So that's one thing that we can do. We could, implement policy and procedures with our tenants to make sure that this apron A is where you do your engine run-ups from now on.
That yet does not exist, but it could most certainly be drafted.
We do have designated areas for run-up. Right now, it's on taxiway Kilo, that area that we just constructed, and prior to that was what we call the Valley West Apron. The Valley West Apron is being leased out right now, so that's why we moved it over to Kilo. It'll move back over to a different area once things change.
But there's no policy that dictates to FedEx where they can run up there.
Not with those size aircraft. Yeah, no. Typically, the policy is with maintenance and overall our maintenance facilities like Prime Whitney or Heritage or things like that. Yeah.
And that's all I had on those measures. So that covered all the measures that have been approved. I just addressed in turns. That's why we say there were no new measures to be added. Okay.
All right. So what we thought was going to be the meat of the meeting was going to be on sound insulation, and I know we are running a little behind. So you'll find that the slides are very wordy. We will be, I won't be reading them to you, and we will be putting this up on the website and can send you a larger print if you want, because I know they're difficult to read here. A lot of this we've already discussed before, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but we're going to tackle three pieces of the sound insulation program, and that is how we determine who is eligible, what the policies and procedures would be, and how we implement the program. So in determining eligibility, as with anything that has to do with the federal government, there are all kinds of regulations and rules that are set forth that came through a program guidance letter and is now incorporated into the AIP handbook on how to determine who is eligible for sound insulation. And there are some qualifying requirements, including that the homes must be located within the 65 noise contour or higher. There is a qualification in the standard that states that if you're outside the contour, you're not eligible unless there is a local lower standard. And to explain what that means is if a local jurisdiction like the city of South Burlington decides to adopt a lower noise contour, the 60 DNL, as non-compatible for residential use, then that would be the standard the FAA would approve for sound insulation. So if South Burlington said anything in the 60 or higher is not eligible for residential use, then that could potentially be eligible for federal funding. The caveat to that is that the city of South Burlington, as an example, would have to enforce that new land use jurisdiction. So they would not allow any new development of residential use in that 60 DNL contour. It's a pretty stringent standard. The FAA makes jurisdictions jump through a lot of hoops and prove they're actually implementing these new lower standards. So we typically don't see a lot of that done. What we do see is what's called block rounding or neighborhood equity. So when we look at the noise contour and it typically comes to a point and might include half the houses on a block, then we would sit with the FAA, the airport would sit with the FAA and say, it makes sense that all the homes on this block be included in the sound insulation program area. And we use natural boundaries for that, streets, water, edges of neighborhoods. So that is a process that we'll be going through when the NEM is updated with the new contour.
Can you just talk a little more about that? In reading the chapter you all sent out a couple of weeks ago, the way I was reading it is that there's eligibility is determined based on a quantity of homes.
Correct.
Go through the process. So given what we know about the noise exposure map, and that it could very well change during this NCP.
Correct.
How is that handled?
That's a great question. We're going to talk a lot about that individual home eligibility. So this is determining the eligible project area. That's the first step. What homes would qualify inside the contour, and if we add a couple to square off a block. So that's the first thing. And all of this is all outlined in the Appendix R of the AIP handbook.
So that activity hasn't started yet?
That has not, no.
Okay, so when it does start, then your consulting group will be working with
the airport and the FAA.
And where does the city
I think what, I won't speak, well, I'll speak for you, Nick. What we would do is make a recommendation. Okay. And I would imagine that the airport would consult with their partner cities on that information. It ultimately has to be approved by the FAA.
Because there is a section, right, in the NEM and in the NCP that allows for humanized.
Correct.
Right, which is
that's what this is.
You're blocking.
Correct.
Where you are not isolating any specific areas of residence just because a certain contour, cuts through.
Cuts through a street.
In 40-year history here, based on when things started in '89, we've never, when I say we as either a community or a local government, have never been able to participate in that kind of activity. And the decision of humanizing has always been enjoyed.
Let's talk about the future for a second. I agree. The humanized line was in the old noise exposure map. I don't believe it's in our current noise exposure map. But we would go to the local land use jurisdictions to look at where the 65 line is today and what makes sense to be incorporated and not incorporated.
But the ultimate decision is the FAA.
I mean, last
True.
time when we looked at what happened, we had contour lines that cut a townhouse. And one resident, one part of it qualified,
Yeah.
and the other didn't. I mean,
We're looking at the future, though, George.
So,
I
if I
assure
could just-
you, we
if-
will.
if I
we-
could-
that we need to be involved, our city government.
Absolutely.
And the committee needs to be involved, and that we don't find ourselves in a position where we're dictated to what lines fall where. The community should.
I agree. I agree, and we will bring this to the community. We'll bring it through the public hearing process. As long as the FAA is on board with what is included and not, that inclusion is going to determine funding for us.
Advocates for that.
Sure.
activity.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which
I-
is, and that's why we're here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the next step is once the, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I know you have quite a bit of content, kind of reviewing the FAA rules methods, but what is, I guess I'm back to my original question a few months ago about the role of this committee. So you're telling us what the rules are, but are you expecting as this is getting drafted, is there something that you're looking for input from on the committee or from this committee on what goes into the plan? I'm not
Correct.
hearing what the question is that we should be providing input back to you on.
That's correct, and I don't think we've asked that question yet.
Okay.
So I see why you're confused. We're in the process of presenting a lot of information to everyone about all the options that are available. And then at the end of that process, in March or May, then we'll talk about what we think.
So this blocking one is one of those
Correct.
topic areas,
Yeah,
right?
correct.
And the local jurisdiction wanted a different noise line. That's
Correct.
one of those things. Sure.
With the caveat that if the grant for the noise exposure map comes and we're updating the contour, those lines are going to change.
We can only deal
Correct.
with the existing.
That's correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So-
But that is a big deal for me, because if we're.
Correct.
If eligibility is determined once on a noise map that currently exists, that puts us out of the, so that was my question, is eligibility determined at the onset, or is it an ongoing eligibility process depending on what the current noise map says?
It's what the current noise map says.
But is it eligibility determined once as part of the
No.
NCP or on an
What-
ongoing basis?
On an ongoing basis.
So when the new map comes, yes, we
Correct.
will be coming, depending on the changes in the noise exposure map, to whatever jurisdiction is within those contour lines.
So that's a
and
good
changing those
question.
Does that mean the NCP gets updated to reflect that new?
It does not have to, but it can. And so what we're faced with here is we have a contour that got updated, but we didn't update the NCP. And it has become clear to the airport that the community wishes to see something other than land acquisition. And so that's what this process is what else can we do other than land acquisition? So we're a little out of sync, because usually you do the map and the NCP together. We're sort of doing them in two different pieces. There was discussion about whether to stop the NCP and wait for the new map, but because this process is so long, takes 18, 24 months, we felt, and the airport felt, that if we could get the NCP updated and approved, then whatever comes when the new map comes, everything's ready to go, and the funding can be in place and the program can get started, because there is currently an existing map with existing impacted homes.
And the language in this document would reflect, future amendments to a noise
Correct.
exposure map and what to do with that noise exposure map in different municipalities.
You'd have a new noise exposure map with an updated NCP.
Say that again?
Well,
No.
No?
You would not necessarily have an updated map with an NCP. All we're updating is the NCP.
Okay, so when we go about doing the NCP for the F-35.
You're going to do the noise exposure map.
That is correct.
Correct.
And the noise compatibility program that is associated with that activity, that would be the current one that we're pursuing now.
Correct.
In order to go after the AIPs, to take whatever advantage we can.
Correct.
In the financial or the grant cycle that we're in.
Correct.
And when we're done with the new F-35 NEM, we can then reassess the NCP and amend the current NCP, which is this
That is a possibility, yes. Or you can stick with the NCP that you have. It's, well, okay. So there are two pieces. The one is the NEM, which is the map, which is the line on the map that says these people get something and these people are not eligible. The NCP says for the people who are eligible, here's what we can do for them, A, B, C, D, E. That's what we're trying to figure out. I don't believe that with an update of the NEM, with the F-35 contour, that there are any measures that would be considered then that are not going to be considered as part of this process. So the intent is whatever we're looking at for this process would carry forward with whatever the new maps are, which is why Winooski and other jurisdictions that are not currently under the 65 DNL contour have been asked to participate. So they are aware of what the possibilities could be should the contour grow and what mitigation could be offered to the residents of those areas.
I mean, I'm just worried about going after AIP grant funds,
Mhm.
the city of Burlington and the airport, under the current or under a completed NCP based on today's NEM. And then tomorrow find out that another additional 400 or 600 or how many homes in Winooski
That does-
are affected.
Yes, and that-
now we've got to go after money and we don't get it.
That they're
I'm
two
not
separate.
following
They're
that.
two separate and distinct things. So, what the plan that is designed that says you can do sound insulation, easements, and sales assistance doesn't say you can only do it for those homes in the 2015 contour. It says
would
you
follow
can
to that
do
no noise
these
exposure.
programs, and then whatever the contour is with the F-35 contour, if it includes Winooski, those homes are included in that plan. So you're not being left out
So could
for the
somebody take
future.
advantage of sound insulation in, next year, and then when the upgraded sound study happens, and it's, let's say, the contour is now spread farther,
Mhm.
would they then be eligible for acquisition, or?
If the homes move into the 75, and we'll get to this, that is where the line is. The FAA wants anything in the 75 contour and higher purchased. Anything below that would
But
be.
if it changed, in other words,
There's a lot of
basically that-
hypothetical
that's
things.
Yep.
65, and that's so.
And then it goes to the
qualify for
70.
sound, and then you're at 80.
Mhm.
2 years later when it updates.
Then there would be a
You
recommendation.
haven't
Yeah.
denied your ability to
Correct.
trigger those events. You're
Correct.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so, okay, sorry.
No, I think it had to be under.
Yes, no, I agree. I appreciate the questions. So once we have the project area, whatever that is, the first step is to develop this acoustical test plan, and I think, George, this is the thing you were talking about earlier, you as well, that's mentioned in the technical memorandum that was sent out. And this is a requirement of the FAA. It's about a 6-month process, which sets forth protocols for qualifying individual homes for sound insulation. And the first step in that is doing a survey of the eligible project area, the neighborhood. And this is both a windshield survey where we're collecting information about all the housing types. Is it single family? Is it multifamily? What's the roof structure? What's the noise level exposure it's in, the DNL? What's the building material? What's the housing type? All of that is done through a windshield survey and put into a database. There may be additional surveys of a quick visit to homes to determine if there are any noise paths in the house you cannot see from the street. Do you have through the wall air conditioners? Do you have skylights? We can't see the back of the houses. Do you have big sliding glass doors, bay windows, that type of thing? All of that is compiled into a huge database. And it's then categorized, the homes are then categorized into different categories. And the FAA says for each category that you create, single family ranch style home with a brick facade, you have to test anywhere from 10 to 30% of those homes. If you have 10 homes that are like that, you test 3 homes. You acoustically test them, and we'll talk about that process in a minute. And if they come in at a noise level of 45 dNL or higher, then all the homes in that group are eligible for sound insulation. If you test that 30% and there's mixed results, then the FAA will probably say you need to test every home of that type and determine individually if it's eligible or not. It's a lot of work. So this is the process that has been used in the New England region. Richard Doucette has participated in this, and it's something we've done a couple of times now. We actually have a lot of processes to move it along much more quickly. But once all of that is determined, you have your 10 categories of homes, you know the ranches all qualify, you know that the split levels need testing, you can then put together a list of homes you know are automatically ready to go into sound insulation and those that have to be tested. And then you look at the noise level bands, so the 65 to 70, the 60 to the 65, and you determine what treatments you're going to give those homes. And if you have some that may not need the full package of windows and doors and ventilation, you come up with a treatment plan that has to get approved by the FAA. And then there's a pilot program where you do some homes, and then we always have to test afterward, after the construction's completed, to prove that we've met the interior noise level goal of 45.
Now that's not for all rooms, right? Or it's only for rooms?
All eligible spaces.
All eligible or
habitable spaces, correct. So, and there's more slides on this, so we'll get through this. But I think one of the questions you had, Paul, was what if you treat a house for sound insulation, you test it, and it doesn't meet the required interior noise level of 45? Then the contractor and the consultant team go back and look at why it didn't, and would provide additional treatment until it does meet that interior noise level. So in order to be eligible, just generally speaking, homes have to have been constructed prior to October 1st, 1998. That's an FAA rule. If there is a home that was built after that, it would not be eligible for sound insulation. It has to be in the approved contour, we've talked about that, and it has to have an energy average of an interior noise level of 45 dB in the habitable rooms. Non-habitable rooms are things like garages, bathrooms, hallways, those types of spaces. Bedrooms, living rooms, sitting rooms are all habitable rooms. Finished basements are not. We don't.
Depends. I mean, there's
If it's a walkout basement versus
Yeah. So, and we have a whole policy and procedures would set that up for each program, so with the FAA.
All right. So the way the noise testing works is that the acoustical consultants will come. They have a loudspeaker. They set it up outside of the house. They blast a bunch of noise at it, and they take measurements both inside and outside of each of the habitable rooms.
So they measure an outdoor, indoor.
Correct.
TC.
Correct. And that.
American or European?
Brad, American.
European what?
Is the OTC American or European? Because the Europeans use a greater number of bands.
It's done in octave bands. Yeah, we're doing it in octave bands.
How many?
Jeez.
I don't know.
It's, from
Can you take this
50?
conversation
Yeah,
offline?
okay. So
the low band is 50.
we can get that back to you. So that calculation, the difference between the outside noise versus the inside noise, there's a mathematical calculation, and that's where you get the 45 DNL threshold number. And we can go through, we can send you examples of the math if you'd like. I know we tend to repeat a lot of these things, and we weren't sure how much information to include. So you do the test. If it comes in at 45 or higher, the home's eligible for sound insulation. If it's not, if it's below 45, then those homes would be eligible for the other programs that would be offered. Things like sales assistance, purchase assurance, or the easement acquisition. So you're not completely out, but you would not be eligible for sound insulation. Once all of that acoustical test plan is created, all that information is sent to the FAA, it's approved by the FAA, we then get into the process of developing the policies and procedures for this particular program. And then that development goes in coordination with the local jurisdictions that are affected, because it includes building code issues. But we talk about a variety of things, including the purpose, the type of modifications, how long the bid and award cycle will last, what the construction process is, what is eligible, what's not eligible. That gets into the walkout basements versus the no basements or full basements, and what type of treatments that can be offered. And we also have to look at the building code requirements. The FAA will only pay for modifications that help the sound insulation of the home and do not pay for code requirements. So there is a discussion of that during the policy and procedures manual to determine who would be paying for any of those code issues, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the homes are prioritized starting in the highest noise level and working the way out from the 70 all the way down to the 65. That's the way the program works. There are things that the airport can look at and take input from the neighborhoods or the jurisdiction, including things like, do you want to allow people, and when you're looking at the 70 DNL and there's 100 homes, do you want to consider length of residency? The people who have lived there the longest, do they get to go first? Maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. Do you want to look at people who own versus people who rent? Do you want the owners to go first? Do you not care about that? Do you want to do one street at a time, so everybody on one street gets done, and then the next street and the next street? Or do you want to take all the homes, rank them from 1 to 100, and just go down the list? So these are all things that are to be thought about by the airport and the community when it comes time to do the policy and procedures manual. Sure.
That's going to be really important for my community. At what point, is this one of those questions you're asking for feedback in for the NCP application, or this is once the application's in, we've gotten approved, then we come back together and set these values?
Correct. Yeah.
The latter, yeah.
Yeah. And I think when you think in terms of things like length of residency or ownership versus rental properties, again, we're talking about the individual noise levels. So if the 100 homes are in the 70 DNL and the grant is going to be for enough to do 50 homes, is there a way we want to prioritize those 50 homes? Does the airport want to prioritize them purely by noise level? The 74.9, 74.5, or of all those 100 homes, if you've been there 50 years, you get to go before the person who moved in a year ago. So those are the kinds of things that would come up.
Two things. Did you just say that that the prioritization in the highest noise levels are interior noise or
Exterior.
exterior noise?
By the noise, that's a great question. Thank you, Paul. So it's the exterior noise contour level.
And then the 3 bullet points there, is that the full list of criteria which can be done, or is that an example of what
Those are examples.
the community could choose?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. We've seen things where I had a program once where if someone was in the sound insulation program and they sold their house, the new owners couldn't get in for a year because they didn't want them to get the process done, get halfway through the process, sell the house, and then a new person moves in. And the person next door has been waiting 20 years, and, the new person gets the sound insulation. So it's a lot of considerations. There'll be a lot of discussion about that. But the list can be, this is not the only thing. These are just examples of things we've seen.
But it's something we're going to have to come to agreement on. We
I
can't
think
have
so.
a different set of values for South Burlington than we do for Winooski.
I would recommend that we make it equal for the entire program.
Well, I take it your consultant group has been there, done that before, so
Mhm.
obviously you've seen some of the parameters or some of the priorities that have been listed, so you most definitely should be in a position to present those to us.
Right.
And then as a TAC group, we could address them and.
Correct.
And either realign them or add
Correct.
to them.
Yes. So the next thing that the policy and procedures will look at is how fast will the program go. And typically what you'll see in this region is that there'll be a grant for design and for the bidding of the work. And then the FAA will not issue a grant until a bid comes in, so they know how much the construction's going to be for any package of homes. We typically see homes in about 50 home packages. It will depend on what the funding is that the airport match can make. And the typical cycle is 12 to 18 months. So you typically get a grant for design and bid, then you turn that into the FAA for a new grant that does the construction. And they're sort of always overlapping. You're designing and constructing back to back to back. So
just to put this in a timeline then. If the NCP is completed by end of 18, we probably wouldn't see some of the earliest homes being touched by the SIP or by the sound insulation program until the end of 19 or later.
Correct.
Just to put
Yeah.
things in perspective.
That's
we're looking at
correct.
12 to 18 months.
Correct.
So we're looking at end of 2019, possibly June
Mid
of 2020.
Correct. I would agree with that.
We have our first funding on our CIP plan, on our capital improvement plan with the FAA to commence in 2019 for the sound insulation program. If that's going to happen or not is dependent on the federal funding.
So what you'll see in most programs is replacement of the existing windows with an acoustical dual aluminum window. It's actually two windows molded together. It's actually two sashes. You open one and then you open the second window. We replace the doors with acoustically rated doors. We may add caulking and weather stripping to an existing door if it's not, if it's got enough sound deadening material but just needs some extra help. If there is not central air conditioning or ventilation, then a central air conditioning system would be installed. If there are window or wall units, those would be removed. If there is existing central air conditioning, then we would look at making sure there's enough fresh air flowing through the house to meet code. So those are the primary treatments that you see in these programs. There may be other treatments that come through through the discussion with the FAA. Do we add attic and wall insulation? And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. Extra layers of wall or ceiling board. You'll see this typically on capes where there's no mass to the ceiling. If you have a through-the-wall AC, or if you have mail slots or pet doors or milk chutes, those would get closed off. So if you have a pet door, your neighbors have pet doors, you're going to lose your pet door. It's a really hard thing when people but we have to seal up those holes so the noise doesn't get in. So here's the typical set of treatments. We break it down by 5 dB noise contours. Again, this is the exterior contour. The basic treatments we talked about, the windows, the doors, the air conditioning. If you get into the next higher noise level, the 70 to the 75, we may have to put in some commercial or heavier grade window products. We also may have to add additional mass to walls, a layer of gypsum board, or to ceilings, particularly if there's no mass. We see that in capes, as I mentioned. And anything above the 75, it's not recommended to do sound insulation. We looked at this in one project, and you would have to add double layers of wall construction and gypsum board, and then you get into all kinds of building code issues. So we would not be recommending anything above the 75. And then we come into the building code compliance. So there will be meetings between the airport, the consulting team, the design team, and the jurisdictions, Winooski or South Burlington, to look at what the building code is, if there are requirements for things like smoke detectors, carbon monoxide monitors, egress, electrical upgrades. If those are not eligible under the sound insulation package, and things like smoke detectors and carbon monoxide monitors typically aren't, then there's a discussion on whether those improvements are done by the homeowner or paid for by the airport. In some cases, if they have an homeowner has an electrical panel, it is completely undersized for the house, and we need to add an air conditioning system. Sometimes those will get paid for, sometimes they won't, and the homeowner may be asked to upgrade their electrical panel. So as we get farther into discussions with the cities on what those issues are, we'll be able to provide more detail on where the funding for that would come from. Okay, I'm sorry?
You mentioned match earlier, like what is a typical match FAA to local?
It's typically 90% federal. There's a 6% state and then 4% local. That's typically how the AIP program is operated today.
So I know throwing a bunch of information, and Sarah's going to actually go through the actual process of a house, and we'll try to keep it very short. If you have questions, if you want, you can send them to us in an email. We can provide you written answers, get that back out to the committee, or we can have discussions afterward on that, because I know we're way past our.
Emails from people outside the community?
Yes, and all of this will be posted on the airport's website as well.
There is information, we'll take information from anybody if it'll help the process and make it more informative.
All right. So the last piece is just that implementation of the program itself. So we've gone through, we've set up the pace, and we've started on that first group of homes. So this is that each phase of work. Again, it could be 50 homes, could be up to be a little bit larger. There are some programs where it could be 100 homes at a time. And this process, we'd start with pre-design. So this is where we've selected through that prioritization the 100 homes that will be invited. Invitation letters will go out. There'll be an application with initial survey. It's some general information, how many rooms in your home, how many windows you have, do you have young children, elderly, people that might need special needs during construction. And we hold a homeowner outreach meeting, which will be similar information to what I'm presenting and what Diane have presented on what's the program about, what can you expect to get out of the program for treatments, basic information. Pre-acoustical testing. So Diane mentioned this sort of two-part process. Pre-acoustical testing may not apply to specific homes. You may have already been pre-qualified. But if you're in one of those groups where they were not all eligible, then the testing would come in at this point. Following that, we'll start the design process. So the consultant team would have what we call an assessment visit. We'll take about an hour and a half and come into the home, draw up floor plans, measure up windows and doors, really look at all of those different noise paths so that we can go back to our office and design treatments specific to your individual property. We'll go back and bring that to a good point of design where we understand what the treatments are, lay out an air conditioning system. I think one of the prime issues for homeowners that they really have to think about in New England is if we're adding air conditioning and we have to add a unit, you may need to give up a closet. And so it's those conversations during that homeowner review meeting of, all right, here's where we'd recommend we're looking at this. We may need to take part of a closet for ductwork. We may need to take part of a closet to add an air conditioning unit, and going through all of those treatments with the homeowner. At that point, we'd have you sign a participation agreement. So that's signing off on window colors, door styles, in addition to sort of the general package of treatments. And if the airport decides and the community decides that an easement will be part of this, you'd sign that initial easement at this point. The easements actually don't get filed until construction has been completed, but it would be signed at that point and not executed until later.
When would be the discussion of those easements?
So following the next meeting, once we've gotten through all of these different programs, so sales assistance and things, we'll circle back to discussion of easements and what that includes and whether that's something that the airport would be pursuing.
So ducted air conditioning is the only option? I mean, ductless air conditioning zone on it?
That may be, and it's
Actually preferable now.
so I think there's again, that's part of that treatment package. So we're going to look at each home individually and see what makes sense for that home. Following that homeowner review, the team will go back and just finalize those designs and get those into a bid package. So we'd be bidding out 100 homes, 50 homes at once with that. With that bid package, that goes out for a public bid. So it'll be issued to contractors that are insured, have background checks, bonded, licensed for that amount of work. And there are a number of national contractors that really understand all of the coordination with the individual homeowners, with the airport, and then they'll often work with local contractors for the actual installation of products as well. We'd get those reviews, those awards in, we'd get the bids in, review those, and then go through an awarding process to the lowest responsible bidder. So in the specifications, it is a public process, it is a low bid, but we also have a number of specifications and criteria for experience in installing these types of products, experience in this type of project management, federal programs and things, so that we're making sure that the project moves smoothly. At that point, the airport would be simultaneously going for that grant, and we'd be giving the contractor a notice to proceed with the construction work itself.
There's no preference to give that kind of contractual work to local workers to keep the local economy stimulated?
So I think there's a couple things. There's always a DBE requirement, local disability, disabled business, and woman-owned minority business set aside. There may be a local business set aside.
It cannot be.
It cannot be.
No, because it's federal dollars, you can't have a local business set aside that violates the federal procurement regulations. There would be discussions on how to structure the program so that local contractors could bid on this work. And what we typically see is that the local contractors will team with the large national contractor who's used to doing all the paperwork and the federal part of it, and then they are trained and get enough experience that they can start bidding on their own as a prime contractor.
And Aaron Desentel actually handles the DBA program for us, and we're actively, we're working really hard to make sure that we meet those needs and exceed them. So I would say that she'll be involved, and we'll do everything in our power to make sure that there's local participation, but at the same time following the rules and regulations of the program.
Yeah, and I think on a lot of these programs we'll have a pre-bid meeting for contractors. Following that, we'll also often have sort of a meet and greet for local contractors and the big national contractors that do this. So we'd be working through that process. So following the award of the bid, the contractor goes out, will go back out into your home, verify all of the products, all of the measurements, and then the consultant team will just verify those, and the products will be ordered. There is a big lag between when those measurements are made and when the products come in. They're all custom made. It can be anywhere from 12 to 15 weeks to get that full allotment of windows and doors, custom made windows and doors in. So about 6 to 8 weeks before the work starts, the contractor will have a full schedule together. The homeowners will be notified as to when construction would be happening on their home. Construction, it's 2 weeks of active construction, so the contractor has 2 weeks to get in and do all of the major work, window, door installation. During that time, at the end of the day, you're always going to have a window in an opening, a door secured in an opening. You may not have all of the trim painted that day, but they move through the homes in 2 weeks. That last 2 weeks and that 30 days for the full time is just any punch work. So there's a punch list made, window adjustments, paint touch-ups, things like that would just follow, which would be scheduled with the homeowners.
Permanent inspections.
At the end of the day, you're always weather tight.
Yep.
Every day.
Every day, yep. During construction as well, that initial survey and the information that the architecture team is really taking in. We'll be looking to provide a room of refuge. So if you have children, elderly, there'll always be a room and a space in the home. We do need somebody over the age of 18 at the home every day, so we try to accommodate both construction and providing small space for them to, for you to hang out in while construction's happening. Following construction, the homes that have been pre-tested will go through a post-acoustical testing. So this may not happen on every single home, but if you did get that pre-acoustical test, we'll come back and do the post-test for that. So, and again, each homeowner comes in that 30-day, 2-week, then 30-day period. We'll go through that full bid cycle and close out the project. And meanwhile, there'll be a design team working on that next. So it'll start to cascade through.
So you can, in fact, can have a whole category or class of homes that never had to be pre-tested.
Correct.
That could go through this program.
Correct.
And never require a post-test.
Yep, so.
No, I would disagree with that. I think there would be homes that may not have been pre-tested.
That would get.
No, that's not true. We would post-test the pre-test.
Right.
Correct. But you wouldn't necessarily
So the-
post-test all of the pre-tests.
Correct.
It's a smaller percentage to get post-tested.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But you would have to pre-test at least 10% of each category or class of homes. Okay, got it. I got it.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. And again, that's where the ATP language will come in, and we'll determine what that looks like. And so,
And also, just for your information, the way the process moves forward is we typically do the construction 4 starts a week. So we start a home Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So it is an ongoing, there are multiple homes under construction at any one time. So the process moves very quickly.
Yeah.
We don't start one home, it takes 30 days. Start the second home, it takes 30 days. So typically it's 4 starts a week, and each home takes about 30 days.
So you have window installers, doors installers.
Correct.
right,
move on,
and they're moving.
Mechanical.
Yeah.
coming in, do trim
Correct.
work, painting, that kind of, yeah.
Correct, yep.
So it's a rotating setup.
Correct.
Your testing percentage of the homes in each type of home category, I missed the threshold. What threshold would have to be above 45 dB?
So if we had a category of capes, let's say there's 100 capes that are in one category, and we're testing 10% of that. So if we test 10 homes, all 10 of those, if they were eligible, then that whole category of 100 would be eligible. If one failed out of that 10, then we'd have to look at a next criteria. And what we would work out with the FAA is, are we now testing the rest of those 90, or is there now, can we look at those 10 and say, well, this one has an addition on the back, and that might be an anomaly, and start to go down and do another set within that, make another subset. So that's where we would work closely with the regional ADO, FAA office, to determine that portion. So there isn't an exact science to it, but we would try to get large groups of homes in and qualified. So, and so then again, post-testing, we'd close out that contract and move on to the next through the program. So, and that's the end of the sound insulation program. So I know we covered a lot of information. Again, the best way to email is just to go to BTV Sound at Jones Payne. That comes to Diane and I, but then it also is for the full group. That's where our emails come out for the TAC committee. So any questions that come out, if there are a number of questions, like Diane said, we can put together additional information and send it out before the next meeting. And I know it's a lot to digest. So the next meeting will be March 13th. We'll be looking at, this is probably the meatiest of all of the different land use measures. We'll be looking at the rest of the land use measures next time, and discussing any feedback that comes back from this meeting. The 5th meeting right now, we have it tentatively scheduled for May. We don't have an exact date. Some of that is pending. If we hear on the NEM, we may shift it a little bit. It's also pending, how far do we get with this land use measures information next time in the conversation. So, we're trying to keep the schedule going, but understand that it may make sense to look at that overall schedule with the NEM.
So question for you, I know a lot of this has been around the focus around homes.
Yep.
And prioritization, but a school is within the 65. What kind of prioritization? Again, I don't want to come across competitive
Oh, right.
homes, but essential to the community and the homes around it is the school. So what kind of ranking or prioritization happens with the school in this particular situation?
So within the contour, if it was just residential, we'd start at the closest homes to the airport and move out, and community building. So if the Chamberlain School or any school was at, the 67, when we got to the 67, it would also become eligible. As part of the conversation in putting together the land use measures for the NCP, and I think following some of these items, we would discuss if there's a higher prioritization for any of those other public buildings. Again, typically the regional FAA has looked to say, let's just keep the prioritization at where that first layer at what DNL contour you're at, but it also is a conversation, and the community and airport can look at that. So.
To Charlie's point, a couple of different meetings. I feel like we're kind of mixing up questions that we need to decide for the NCP application, and then questions that will be part of decision making later in the process. I'm wondering, just so we can think, especially for those of us who are representing elected officials, would it be possible to draw up a list of what are the decision points for the NCP and what are you asking us to consider versus, and I'm not even asking you to put together the list of future decision points,
Right.
but just so we have a clear understanding, what should we be listening, this is a lot
As
of new
the
information for a lot of
committee.
us. What should we be listening for, and what should we be trying to solicit feedback from our community on for the application, as opposed to all the questions we'll ever have to consider as partners in this effort.
Great thought.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
That
We
makes
can
a lot of sense. Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you again, everybody, and if there is any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to the Jones Payne Group or the airport directly. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.